Welcome to the Big Four Accounting Firms podcast, brought to you by big4accountingfirms.com and the Big Four Accounting Firms YouTube channel. Before we get started, just wanted to remind everybody to support us if you have a chance or if you can. Even $1 helps, and we have a link in the description to a website called Buy Me a Coffee. It's just a way to donate to us and support us. Again, any amount is helpful so that we can keep putting out content. And there's also other ways for you to support us in the show notes to this podcast or on YouTube in the description. In today's podcast, we're going to cover a couple of news stories. Today I was on Twitter looking at the Big Four accounting firms' accounts, and I noticed a common theme. A lot of them were tweeting about the cybersecurity issues related to the Colonial Pipeline issue in the United States. And they're all had various responses as far as articles and blogs. And I'm going to specifically talk about stuff that I saw from PwC and E&Y. Now, first up, I wanted to talk about an article in the Washington Post. So PwC had the head of their cybersecurity practice write an opinion piece in the Washington Post. And now, why would he do that? He would have done that because he was a former FBI deputy director under Obama, so he probably has contacts in Washington, D.C., and specifically at Washington Post. And now PwC can use that to their advantage. And what this article was about was he was approaching it from what the government should do. And he advocated for the need of centralized organization within the federal government of the U.S. That should be headed up by the current cyber director. And he wanted there to be a partnership between the federal government and private sector. And he is basically advocating for a more organized approach to cybersecurity and cyber response, because the United States has been having a lot of cybersecurity issues and also issues with the grid. So in the US, we had the SolarWinds hack, we had this Colonial Pipeline attack, and then there was a winter storm that took down portions of the grid in the United States. So there's a lot of vulnerabilities in the United States. And the Big Four have also been talking about the need for infrastructure investment, as the government in the US has an infrastructure bill. And so the Big Four accounting firms is trying to get that passed through so they can advise on it and win work from it. But it seems like something that's going to need to be invested as part of this bill is going to be cybersecurity. I mean, initially it's not that big, but now it appears that it needs to be bigger. And he was advocating that there needs to be more organization. And he says today it's split among many organizations, and the response to the SolarWinds attack was split between multiple organizations, the FBI, NSA, etc. But he says this needs to be centralized. And it's not only the response that needs to be centralized. He's talking about the intelligence, and the sharing of intelligence also needs to be centralized and organized so that the government can anticipate and cut off these attacks. And that is really where he advocates for partnership with private organizations. And I'm sure he is going to be advising that the government use PwC. But the reason I wanted to highlight that was multiple reasons. It shows the importance of cybersecurity, number one. Number two, the Big Four accounting firms are large professional service firms that have cybersecurity practices, and they're trying to grow, and they will grow it as a result of this and many other attacks, not only in the U.S., but around the world, because this won't only happen in the U.S., and it was an international group that was involved in hacking the United States. So more governments around the world will be responding to this, or they'll be attacking each other, and they'll need assistance in dealing with that. But also that PwC has a strong government practice or strong government network. They have a lot of people like this guy who are former government people, and they bring them in as partners because of their connections within the government. And depending on where you want to end up in the Big Four accounting firms, you might want to look to see if the Big Four accounting firms and the practice you're going to join has one of these people, because there's potentially a lot of knowledge that you can gain from these people, but they also have a strong network. So You can utilize that. And something related, E&Y was also tweeting out a story, and they had an article that says 6 questions to expose gaps in your organizational cyber resiliency. And they just basically retweeted this from last month, April 2021. And it's basically 6 questions that private organizations should be asking. And it's from multiple approaches. It's from a consulting perspective. For example, you should be assessing your cyber risk. Do you know what your cyber risk is? Privacy, also privacy like data governance, not only governance of your information, but governance of your customers' information. And really, the main point of this article was focusing more on COVID-19 and how everybody's going online and how that increases cyber risk for organizations and their customers. But also, another thing that it brought up was like the audit side of cyber risk. For example, if we apply it to the Colonial Pipeline situation, Colonial Pipeline reportedly paid the ransomware. They paid in crypto to these hackers. And there will be the direct financial hit of that payment, but there's also, the reputational risk and other expenses they're going to have to incur. I'm sure they'll face some legal liability at some point. They're going to have to hire consultants as well. And what this article shows, and I'll include links to both these articles, that companies don't necessarily know how to measure that the financial impacts of cyber hacks. And another thing too is, from an audit perspective, is internal controls related to cybersecurity. That's only going to grow now because investors are going to want to know if you have controls and if you have like a standardized set of controls to face cybersecurity issues that have come up in the past at other companies before they feel comfortable investing. And I'm sure that's only going to increase as these attacks increase and as we learn about the potential financial impacts of these attacks, because potentially one of these attacks could take out a company completely where they're just not trusted anymore, and there's going to be a control framework that's going to come up over that, and the Big Four accounting firms are going to be responsible for that. So there could be more audit work for the Big Four accounting firms to win here, but there's definitely going to be consulting work as far as cybersecurity. First of all, from COVID-19, like E&Y says in this article, but second, from these recent attacks against SolarWinds and the Colonial Pipeline. So those are just some articles I wanted to discuss today related to cybersecurity that I saw floating around social media. And another thing too that was interesting that I saw today was that Binance, which is a cryptocurrency platform where you can buy various cryptocurrencies internationally, is being investigated in the US by government agencies, the Department of Justice and the IRS, which is very interesting. And we've spoken before about Big Four offerings, Big Four offerings related to cryptocurrencies and blockchains, but specifically Binance is being investigated because of money laundering. And they don't really offer services in the US, but still the Department of Justice is accusing them of potentially being involved in money laundering. And so I feel like companies like Binance and just investment firms in general, finance firms in general, are going to have to think more and more about regulation around cryptocurrency investing and offerings. And they're going to have to use what we spoke about before, where KPMG was partnering with Coinmetrics on governance and risk around cryptocurrency. And as we specifically spoke about KPMG, but the other Big Four accounting firms will no doubt be getting involved here. This is a huge announcement just related to cryptocurrency, and I'm sure this will only increase. The U.S. has also gone after places that will launder your Bitcoin for you. So they're stepping up, they're gaining knowledge, and finance organizations are going to have to be ready to respond in case this happens to them. And they're going to have to manage their risk of money laundering, but also manage their headline risk of when the government announces investigations into these areas. So there's just a lot of work in technology and cybersecurity for the big four accounting firms to win in blockchain, cryptocurrency, etc. And there's more and more news every day. And it seems like the big four accounting firms are getting out ahead of it. Like these articles they put out today on social media shows that they're responding as these things come out, which is a lot better than they used to be. So those are the updates for today. To stay up to date, make sure to subscribe to this podcast. Support us financially through the Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes if you can. And if you can't, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Big Four Accounting Firms. Thanks for listening.